Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're very well today. It's great to have you with us. I can see a lot of you are joining us at the moment, and that's great. So you're very, very welcome. We have a very interesting webinar ahead for you. So just to get things started, to ensure there are no glitches, that you can see me, that you can hear me, just please enter some little details into the chat. Thank you very much. I see some messages coming through. Hi, Anthony, you're very welcome. That's great. So look, we have a lot of participants joining us today. If you're new to our webinar, if it's your first webinar with us, you are most welcome. My name is Claire. I'm the Client Services Manager here in Great Place to Work. I'm delighted to be with you. Wednesday seems to be a wonderful day for us in terms of celebrations. I was just thinking this morning that last Wednesday we all celebrated St. Patrick's Day, you know, although differently, of course, at home. The previous Wednesday, we were delighted to announce our best workplaces list. We recognised and celebrated all of our certification clients. And then I was thinking on the previous Monday, we had our best workplaces for women's list announcement in recognition of International Women's Day. So there seems to be a kind of concurrent theme on every Wednesday. And I was thinking, gosh, this is Wednesday, we're hosting a webinar. There must be something that we could celebrate. So I had a little look, and funnily enough, there is a few little things. It's World TB Day. It is National Truth Day. And funnily enough, and I am a fan, it is National Chocolate Covered Raisin Day. So look, if Tesco's sale and supply is down and up in chocolate covered raisins, Maurice, you heard it from me first. So there you go. Just a few housekeeping notes. We're recording the session. We're going to share it with you afterwards. We want this to be a conversation. We want a lot of questions. We know time is limited. We only have about an hour. So look, pop your questions into the chat. We will try our best, of course, to answer those that we don't. We will reach out to you afterwards. So look, I'm not going to delay any further because time is of the essence. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Jim Flynn. He's going to introduce and talk to our speakers. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Claire, and thank you all for joining us. We do understand about how the engaging with Zoom and these various webinars, you know, we can get a bit, I suppose, a bit jaded of this different type of interaction, but it's a really exciting subject today, and I'm really thrilled to have the honour of talking to Kathryn and Maurice about it, because it's possibly a once-in-a-generation opportunity in terms of a really fast reset. Really this idea of throwing the pieces of the jigsaw up in the air and having the opportunity to rearrange them, which we might not see again for some time. So it's a really, really interesting subject, and I'm really interested, looking forward to sort of getting into the discussion. I suppose first of all, just to kind of set it a little bit, a couple of things that we're going to do. We're going to look at how it is that you might consider harnessing the opportunity, both for people and for the organization. We're also going to look at the 5 principles behind the blended working policy, the framework that the government have put together, and how you might consider applying them. Tesco and OGP being 2 very different workplaces, but you know, it's going to be interesting to see how their worked examples are engaged with at the minute, of that ongoing development of that, and your opportunity to ask lots of questions. You know, in relation to any issues that you might consider to have in that regard, and then of course how it is you might utilize existing tools, how it is that you might use sort of the key considerations that you might engage with in terms of your own workplace, and how you might apply them. So when you're engaging with your senior team and with the organization in general, what kinds of things should you be taking into account? What kinds of issues should you be considering? I suppose we see 2 broad approaches in organizations at the moment in terms of how they're engaging with this issue. And some organizations are being actually quite reactive. They are, I suppose, responding to employee concerns around, you know, what are the kinds of things, what are the kinds of issues that they're considering in terms of flexible work policies and practices. And they're doing some scattered well-being initiatives, I think, and not being terribly strategic about that, and looking at how it is they're going to change policies and procedures. So those are sort of core things that we see in terms of a reactive piece. Other organizations who really see the opportunity here are clear about what's in it for the organization and what's in it for the employees. They're clear about the benefits and the risks, and they're engaging in their workforce in that conversation about that sort of cost benefit analysis. They're reviewing which aspects of work are best achieved remotely and which are best face-to-face. And they're looking at how they support managers in terms of working in this sort of new way and making sure that they have the right skills to build up the right sort of trust and relationships in terms of accountability and so on and so forth. And they are also sort of managing upwards in terms of what they're doing. So let me just check here, because I think my slide aren't moving here for some reason. So I'm just going to check that again. I would see if you can see this. Hopefully everybody is clearer now at the moment. So looking at those two approaches across organizations and considering which choices are ahead of you, which thoughts might you engage with in that regard. And in the first instance, I'm going to talk to Maurice, and Maurice Kelly is head of people in Tesco. Maurice has a very interesting background. Maurice, I have to say, you're one of those kind of slightly frustrating people that when I look at your profile, I do just wonder what am I doing with my life, right? So you've got 20 years experience between let's say life sciences and of course the Kerry Group. You're chair of Sensational Kids. Tell me about that.
Yeah, first of all, good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here. So thanks for inviting me, Jim, and it's lovely to, I guess, have a conversation today with everybody about the future of work, because I'm very much hoping to learn something myself today. So that's, in terms of expectations, there's one to start with. Yeah, Sensational Kids, Jim. It's a really brilliant. Of course, I'm biased, but it's a brilliant. I'm going to say social enterprise, because it's an interesting. It's a not-for-profit organization, but it's a social enterprise model. So the vast majority of their funding comes from basically a retail business, and they provide subsidized care and services for children with development needs. So it's essentially a substitute for some of the services that should be provided by the HSE for occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. So if any of your children have any developmental needs or are on a waiting list right now for occupational therapy or speech and language therapy, Sensational Kids provides a brilliant service, which is basically subsidized services and no waiting lists. And so I'm chair of that. I've been involved in for 5 years, and it's one of those things that's kind of I'm passionate about outside of work, which is
and you're also on the industry advisory board for DCU.
Yeah, so it's one of these things, Jim. I don't know. I wonder why I'm time poor sometimes, but yeah, no. I was asked to join a panel with DCU who were for their business school, and really their agenda is around making sure they're staying relevant with industry. So, the course they're developing, the content they're developing, making sure that it's fit for future purpose, and staying relevant to industry, which they're doing a pretty good job of, to be fair. We meet 4 or 5 times a year to help that process and guide that process. So yeah, so that's an interesting space as well, and a good learning space for me as well.
You've got a lot on.
Yeah, and in the spirit, Claire was talking about National Truth Day, but you can see some of my lovely artwork behind me from my children, and I've been enjoying the last 2 weeks when they were back at school. My truth for today is that there's 2 weeks of Easter holidays coming up, and I'm not looking forward to that for once. Having had a couple of weeks of working from home properly, we're facing into the 2 weeks of trying to manage that as well. So that's there's a good starter for the future of work.
There's only so much quality time we can take, Maurice, really, isn't there? So Maurice, getting straight into the discussion in terms of future of work in Tesco, and I have some questions up here which you might like to look at in any particular order. And please, I said anybody who's online at the minute, drop in some questions into the chat or the questions and answers, and we look forward to addressing those as we go along, right? So this is, as Claire had said, a conversation. But let me start it off. Maurice, what really is the opportunity for Tesco here, given the level of changes being engaged with at the moment?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Jim. And I guess we're an organization, so people think about the future of work, and right now, what dominates that thought is the office and working from home. And we're an organization that have 13,000 people employed in the country, and the vast majority of those people don't have the option of working from home. Our jobs are in the store, providing brilliant customer service to our customers. So that can't be done remotely, and but there's still an opportunity. So the way we're looking at it at Tesco at the moment is, if I kind of divide it in two, if you like. First of all, the future of work being very much that broad topic, and we could go anywhere with that, right? But right now it's dominated by, we're all working, the vast majority of people, from an office point of view, are working remotely. And then there are clearly roles that are not suitable for working remotely. They're in store and they're delivered there. So there's two pieces we look at. So clearly we have a large group of employees who work in functional roles, support office roles, where we're working remotely over a year now. And in fairness to the team at Tesco, I mean, like everybody else, we evacuated our offices pretty much over a 24 or 48 hour period. And the good news for Tesco is that we were pretty well set up for that, in terms of our IT teams did a great job of turning that around. And we already had some flexible working policies. So it wasn't particularly new. The scale of it and the speed of it was definitely new. So our thoughts right now are, the opportunity for us right now is, whenever things do get back to normal, what's the role of the office actually? And we've already engaged with our colleagues on that last year. So coming up to Christmas, we said, let's take a point of reflection. We asked our colleagues who are working remotely 3 simple things: what's working well, what could be better, what could be easier for you, and if there's one thing that would make your work-life balance better in the future, what would that one thing be for you? And I guess the opportunity, I would say, Jim, there is, when I look at a lot of the discourse and debate at the moment in general industry around this space, the first conversation is to hybrid models and what we're going to do. I guess I'd be much more of a principles-based approach, which is, work-life balance is a personal thing for people. And I don't believe you can come up with something too structured that fits everybody. So we had a really good experience actually from asking our colleagues those 3 questions. We got a brilliant response, and you'll see common themes right throughout that feedback, but it really does give you a flavor of what people really enjoy and what they don't. So we've taken that feedback. We've already started working up our principles about the purpose of our office. We have a team of colleagues working on that. It's not a leadership team in a dark corner of a room coming up with these plans. It's our colleagues telling us, this is what we think is going to work best. And where we're kind of landing is, we will embrace a hybrid model for our office-based teams. And the questions we're trying to work out right now is, well, when do we need to come together? So and it's around collaboration. Innovation is a central piece for Tesco. And that's innovation around everything, and particularly around our customer experience. So innovation, collaboration, and then knowledge sharing. So there are kind of 3 things emerging at the moment as the reasons we need to come together, and the reasons why we need to figure out a way of collaborating on those things. So is it in the office? Do we continue to do it virtually? And the reality is, we've got to figure out, how do you do both of those things? If you really want to work flexibly, how do we do all those things together?
When you ask people those questions, did you end up with a wish list, Maurice, or did you end up with something realistic?
No, we ended up with something really realistic. And I guess we crafted the question very carefully, and we were very honest with our teams. We said, look, we don't want a shopping list, because we won't be able to deliver a lot of that stuff. So if there's one thing for you personally, when you're answering the question, if there's one thing for you, for your circumstances, whether, if I'm representative of some of the people in Tesco, I'm working from home, there's 3 kids running around the place at different times of the day. Others have to look after elderly family members up the road or elderly neighbors. We're all different, right? That question helps to narrow it down. So what's the one thing that would make it things better for you? We got really rich feedback from our colleagues. And like I said, you will see trends. So you will find buckets of trends where you say, okay, people will share that they want to be able to go to the gym in the morning and come in a bit later. They want to be able to do something at lunchtime and step away. They have different commitments outside of work they want to be able to manage, and they'll be very open about that. And it's very easy navigated then. And the other thing about that is it gives us a very clear conversation point with each of those colleagues and their managers, which is, okay, focus on that one thing. Can we accommodate that? Can we manage that? So we're not starting with policies, I think, is the key thing there, because the one size fits all in my experience just doesn't always work. It becomes problematic. And what we're discovering in our journey is that we have flexible working policies. We're not reinventing anything. I guess the opportunity, though, go back to the question, Jim, the opportunity that we're seeing is that it's giving us the opportunity maybe to really implement it better. So I don't think we're creating anything brand new here at all, actually, through this whole pandemic. I think all it's done is force us to focus on why we haven't done some of this before. And the opportunity now is to maybe go after that. And so we've had a really good experience, and we can't deliver everything for sure and certain, but we're just being very honest about that. And the one thing maybe to add to that is what our colleagues are telling us, they're missing the social interaction. So, not everyone wants to work from home. I mean, there's lots of our colleagues telling us, I'm not as effective working 5 days from home. I want a better balance. I want to be able to come to the office for this type of work. And that's been really good to hear. And we've learned a lot out of the types of work people need to collaborate with others in a social way. That's why we all like the office, right? So.
And Maurice, what would you say to, let's say, the finance director or an investor in Tesco? And like, what's in it? What's in it for Tesco? Because that's all very well, right? But and nice, and I appreciate that you are a great place to work and so on. But what's in it for Tesco?
Pure and simple. I'll give you a straight answer, and it's actually to one that, if I see the question about the risks, here's a simple one I would see. The danger is we over-index on the colleague experience, and it's all about let's work from home and let's do all that. It has to be about business performance. So, we're great believers at Tesco that, if you bring yourself to work, you perform better, and you can be yourself, you perform better. If a new way of working means people are happier, feeling better, more engaged around their work, then for Tesco, the opportunities, our customers have great experience. And the last year, so if I go back to retail, because that's our business, for the last year, we've got 12,000 or so colleagues who haven't had the opportunity to work from home or haven't had the necessity. The necessity has been to turn up every day in the store and make sure our stores are open and are safe for customers as well as themselves. And our customer feedback has been brilliant this past year. We've never had such good customer feedback. Our customer net promoter scores are increasing and improving over the past year. That's the message. So the message is our colleagues tell us through our Great Place to Work survey feedback, but also our own internal employee engagement survey. We've got an excess of 93% participation. 9 out of 10 colleagues tell us that we're a great place to work. And they also tell us things we need to improve on and continue to make better. But one of the things that's really important is that they've shared is that they're feeling a greater sense of pride working at Tesco this past year. Our customers are telling us they're seeing that every day, that they're seeing a better level of service. They're seeing colleagues being very warm and welcoming, but being very helpful. And that's what else do you want, really? So from an investor perspective, there's a really good value in this. There's a really strong return on this. And I used to have a finance director I used to work with. We used to joke about, we talk about P&L all the time. And my version of P&L is people and leadership. So we're talking the same language, it just means different things. And that's something that's really important at Tesco. We are continuing to invest in our managers in particular. And the workforce of the future is all around making sure our managers are capable of, making decisions. They're empowered to make those decisions. And certainly the opportunity for us in the retail space is, like I said, we're not inventing anything new, but how can we make sure our workplace is more flexible? If you have to turn up can we be more flexible when you do that? And are we really accessible and inclusive? They're kind of the key things for us.
Maurice, I'm just going to pick up a question that's come in there from Helen, just in terms of are the surveys anonymous? And yeah, certainly they are. Each of them are anonymous, but you have team feedback, so you'll be able to see how a team is responding and act accordingly. So Maurice, what then is the role of HR in terms of delivering sort of value and being seen to deliver value in this kind of change?
Yeah, I think I think if you go back to the question around, I guess, the performance of the business, right? So again, I'd be a strong believer in the role of HR is helping to deliver better business performance. That's our job, and how we do that is by enabling really good people practices, really good engagement with colleagues, and investing in that space. So I think if I look at the future of work, there's definitely a role for all the HR function, and not just the HR function, but as a management team and leadership team, the role is to bring that challenge. So, to make sure that we keep the focus on business performance, as well as all this nice conversation around the future of work. And you put it right at the start, Jim. This is kind of a once in a generation opportunity to do something very, very, I won't say new, because I don't think it's new. I think it's just we've put rocket boosters on the whole conversation of ways of working and agile working. I think the opportunity for HR is to say, right, there's all this good stuff, but what difference will it make? So will it make the colleague experience better? It has to. So that's the first thing. And knowing that it'll make the colleague experience better, how can we then demonstrate that it's actually making the customer experience better, so that our business is performing as a result of it? And then very tactically, so that's the challenge and the opportunity for HR. I think very tactically, then how do you deliver that? It's been really clear about how you enable that. So, for example, we're very clear at Tesco, we need to continue to invest in our managers, help them be as effective and competent and confident as they can be. And we know that makes a difference. Our colleagues tell us in our surveys, and we do weekly listening, Jim. We started last year doing weekly listening surveys to our colleagues, which proved really, really valuable, by the way, in terms of making sure we were continuing to create a safe environment for them during the pandemic. But also what it gave us was really good feedback around the role of the manager and how they were valuing that additional communication managers were providing, and the additional kind of communication from the organization. So I think from a HR perspective, it's been very clear about what's making a difference. So whether that's delivery of learning in a blended way, whether it's dialing up communications, that's our big learning, I would say, at Tesco, is that our colleagues have told us very clearly over the past 12 months, we've ramped up our communication significantly because it was a crisis management situation in terms of running retail. And they really valued that. They felt that they were very clear what we were trying to do. They could see very clearly, more importantly, that we were putting them first. So that's a big learning for us coming out of the whole situation, and something we will build on over the next 12 to 14 months again.
And Maurice, lots of questions coming in, and I'll get to some of them in a moment. One other one I just want to touch on first, if I could. Given the diversity of roles, and you've got a huge diversity of roles that you've dealt with both over the years and in Tesco, right from logistics, right through to commercial, right through to people in stores and store managers and so on. A significant proportion of those people are not necessarily seeing a benefit from this sort of flexibility. How do you cope with fairness under those circumstances? Isn't it grand for you in the office to be able to come and go as you please? Mm-hmm. But there I have to turn up every day in store as a colleague and deliver good service.
It's a great question. And I think it'd be very naive of me to say that it's not an issue, right? And I think the approach I've taken it though is that let's just acknowledge it, that is a difference, and that whether we like that or we don't, that is a point of difference. So if you're in a role that's predominantly office-based, that has the opportunity to work remotely, whether you want that or not, that is a difference. We are very clear that our colleagues in store are the ones who make the biggest impact on our customers, and so we value those roles equally. We're very clear that role can't be delivered from your kitchen or your sitting room. And while that might seem unfair to some people, that's just what it is. What it does do, though, is that it does force us, go back to, again, the point I'd make about not reinventing the wheel here. What it has forced us to do, though, is maybe hold the mirror up and say, have we done enough to support our colleagues in store around flexible working? Have we done enough around making sure the training is at the level it should be at for them to be at their best in their job? So I think the straight answer to that, Jim, is, do you know what? There are some roles you can't do remotely, and you have to turn up every day, and you have to engage with customers because that's what the customers need, and that's what our business is. And I'm okay with that. And I wouldn't shy away from that. The follow on from it is, what can we do though? So I'll give you a practical example. Last year in the middle of the pandemic, at Tesco Ireland, some of the things we did were, for example, ramping up communications, which helped colleagues. But from a flexible point of view, publishing rotas and rosters much further in advance that we had done previous to that, it's a huge benefit to colleagues, made a big difference. So I can see my work schedule for the next 4 or 5 weeks as opposed to week. I mean, that's a huge impact for somebody who's used to maybe having a shorter time span of their work schedule. We shouldn't underestimate that type of what kind of flexibility that can offer somebody in terms of managing their work-life balance. That's an example. I wouldn't shy away from the conversation at all.
I see a very nice comment coming in there from Liz, saying that they're experiencing that as a customer in store. So that certainly that colleagues seem to be reacting in kind. And I think we've touched on Niamh and Liz's question as well in terms of this split between working remotely and so on. I suppose the other question which sort of continually comes up, and I know you've touched on it, Maurice, is just this idea of managing performance versus managing time. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and again, it's not a new topic. It's when we're all sitting in offices or wherever we were before the pandemic, this was always a topic. I mean, how do you crack that performance management nut? And again, I think there's an opportunity here that the more you work, and there's organizations have been doing this for years. They've embraced hybrid models for years, and there's lots of organizations out there that are fully remote and have done lots of work in this space. So there's loads we can learn. We don't have to reinvent anything. I think it comes back to stripping it back to basics, Jim. So, being really clear on, before you can measure anybody on their KPIs, I mean, what's the purpose of the role? Do we have clarity on responsibilities? And I know it sounds very basic, but we do always, and we're all probably guilty of it at different times, we're guilty of kind of focusing on output. And particularly if I take it back to Tesco, we're a retail business. It's fast paced. We're very outcome driven. It is all around delivering for the customers and making sure that we're giving a brilliant service. And this gives us an opportunity maybe just to kind of pull back and say, well, are we measuring the right things? And it's outcome as opposed to effort, right? And then if I tie that back into the conversations we're having with colleagues in store, but also in the office, it's not just confined to that thing of you're working remotely and therefore we can't see you. We don't talk to each other as much in person. We must be clear on the objectives. That's certainly the case. You have to be clear what people are responsible for, and then empower them to go and do their job. That's definitely the piece I would say is that empowerment. So if you got the clarity of the role, well, then you just let people get on and deliver it and give them the guidance and support along the way. But there's definitely a piece I think around dialing up the empowerment, and then what comes the other side of that coin is holding people to account. So empowerment is great, but it can also be a challenge. But I think that's the key thing I would say. And in store, just go back to from the Tesco example, in store it's the same. So we have very clear roles and responsibilities for our colleagues in store, how much time to spend replenishing the shelves, how much time they're actually spent engaging with customers. So this whole future of work is challenging us in that way. So in terms of retail as an example, so much more of our business is delivered through online now. I mean, we are the market leader in the country right now for grocery home shopping. That has fundamentally changed how we engaged. I think one of the nicest pieces of feedback I hear all the time through our customers around our grocery home shopping is our van drivers. So most people think they're driving a van, they're delivering, dropping it at a door. that's a customer opportunity. Our customers are telling us constantly, your van drivers are brilliant. I mean, talk about customer service, really, I mean, I didn't expect it. And that's really great to hear. But that's also an expectation we have of our drivers, is that you do engage with customers. It's about a brilliant customer experience. And the same in store. So I think that performance management piece, I'd say, Jim, to kind of strip it back, I'd say is getting clear on roles and responsibilities, and then figuring out how that empowerment can really work, whatever part of the business you're in. And that's a tough one, but that's something worth spending time on, I think.
So doing a very quick recap there, Maurice, really what you'd be saying is the opportunity for people is to take, I suppose, to have quite a flexible approach and to use the existing policies and procedures and enhance those, and then be quite individualized in terms of stepping up to account in terms of what they want to see change about their own life, and be quite principles-based approach in relation to that. And then the opportunity for Tesco is an enhanced customer experience and more discretionary effort. The role of HR is to, I suppose, to enable that in terms of the senior team, and that there are risks as you go along the way in relation to that. And you know, one of the ways of managing those risks is to look at the skills and the enablers in order to support that way of working. In this, particularly this idea of empowerment and accountability is probably hinging, you know, somewhere there in terms of delivering sort of value for everybody. So given all of that, what key steps would you be advising an organization to take?
Yeah, and look, I don't for a minute think I have all the right answers here, but I think one thing I'd say is from my experience of looking at this, Jim, I would say, first of all, the leadership has to come right from the top. So and again, nothing new in that, but I think now more than ever, I think employees are looking to leadership to set the tone and to set the example more than ever. And delighted to say, I'll take the opportunity to say that at Tesco, what our colleagues have told us is that they really felt valued over this past year in particular, and we put them first. And that's, I'd be very proud of that, actually, that has been a very strong spine to all of our activities the past year. It's been, and I'm delighted that Liz, who mentioned the chat there, that as a customer, she's seen that in store, because that's fantastic. I think if I link two things, Jim, I talked about empowerment, talked about accountability. I think there's also a piece of responsibility in there for colleagues individually, and let's not lose sight of that. So this can't be all on the business as a management team or leadership team. There is an element in all of this, which is if you're one of my team and I'm saying, what's the one thing I can do to help make your work-life balance better? What's the one thing I can do to help you perform better, right? What's the one thing I can do to make sure the environment is great? I'm also going to ask my colleagues, what's the one thing you're going to do that's going to also make your work-life balance better? What's the one thing you're going to do to, you know, maybe show me that you have clarity about your purpose, you're clear on what your goals are? So I think that's my advice, is that first of all, it has to come from the top. Leadership by example, you can't beat it. But number two, I think there's that personal responsibility is really important to get that message across as well.
Those coaching skills that you have worked on and clearly qualified, that sort of come right to the surface there in terms of applying that at an organization level. So thanks very much, Maurice. I'm going to come back around to you for some more questions as
absolutely
according as they build up there, and I think that's really interesting, and thank you so much for sharing that. Right now, I'm going to talk to sort of move on to Kathryn, if we could. And Kathryn, you're also one of those people, right? So head of people and culture at the Office of Government Procurement, and an MBS from DCU, worked in Chase Manhattan and JP Morgan, so very varied experience in terms of both private and public sector, and you know, have won a number of awards at CIPD, and thankfully featured in our magazine there recently. In terms of this subject, along with Maurice. So if I could turn to you, I'm gonna just put up your slide deck here, and here we go. Just 1 second.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And look, thanks for inviting me, and to Claire and Marina. And I think it was very interesting to hear. I was jotting down plenty of learnings from Maurice there as well. So look, I think it's a good opportunity to have this chat. And I suppose I'm delighted to talk about the Office of Government Procurement and how I suppose we transformed, and similar to Maurice's experience, moved rapidly from a situation into remote working. I suppose slightly differently from Maurice, we weren't starting at a position where working flexibly and remote was something that we had done in the organization. So it was pretty much kind of an unprecedented transformation, I suppose, for us. So look, I'm delighted to have a chat, and hopefully we'll get through a few of these slides, and happy to chat about other questions that might come up. Won't bore you with all the detail on this, but just not to assume that everyone knows who we are. We're the central purchasing body of the Government of Ireland, responsible for sourcing the goods and services that assist Irish public bodies in the delivery of important public services. And I suppose everything we do is seen through that lens. Does it add value back to the wider public sector, and in turn to the public that they serve? And I think that that's very important. And we have offices. You'd be delighted to see the Cork one down there at the bottom. So we've offices nationwide, but I think every organization now has offices nationwide, don't they? So look, in terms of, I suppose, the wider, we would be looking at this in terms of the wider socioeconomic rationale for blended working. And obviously the move to blended working supports commitments in the programme for government. There was a commitment for 20% of public sector workers to move to work remotely. So I think the government are probably gleefully happy about discharging that particular action. Also facilitates us in terms of climate action and our carbon footprint. I formerly worked in the Department of Communications and climate action as well. So I'll be very conscious of those requirements as well. And really the optics of people traveling from very long distances every single day where they don't need to is something that would have kind of been at the back of our minds. At an organizational level as well, from a business continuity perspective, I suppose, you know, across the civil service, it's offering a sustainable service delivery model. So if for some reason people can't actually work in the office, I don't want to say about another pandemic, but business contingency and continuity down the line, this makes good sense. In terms of, I just thought it might be helpful for people to consider, who maybe are considering this subject, I should say, from a blank canvas, maybe to look at these high level principles. They've been developed by colleagues centrally from an overall civil service perspective. And I suppose they're reacting to a survey last year that found that 75% of respondents wanted to continue working remotely after the pandemic. And the approach here is to kind of get high level kind of framework principles that other civil service organizations, ourselves included, can then work to and come up with something that suits the needs of our particular organization.
And
I
Kathryn,
suppose,
I think, I mean, when we review these principles, they're equally applicable, you know, or at least closely applicable in the private sector as well, aren't they? Right. So you've got a lot of experience in the private sector as well. These principles would stand as if you were starting from scratch, essentially, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why I like this slide is a bit busy, but I thought it was helpful because I know you share them out, and happy to chat with people on here at a later date if people have questions. But it just kind of gives you almost that kind of checklist underneath some of these kind of big bucket ones. So I suppose, you know, from an organizational perspective, whether you're in the public service or the private sector, you need to meet the needs of your business. So it's really important that all civil service organizations kind of that's foremost, I suppose, in considerations. Like we have to look at the suitability of roles, like Maurice had said, you know, not every role is going to be suitable for this blended working arrangement. But I suppose the key thing under this first principle is that there is no kind of diminution to business and service delivery as a result of service, you know, of blended working arrangements. So employees kind of have to bear that in mind. And I suppose the principle here would be that this is reviewed organization by organization on an ongoing basis. And I think that's something the private sector probably do a little bit better in terms of having those organization reviews, making sure from an OD perspective you're still adding value and what changes do you need to make. So look, that's just one example of one of those framework principles that we have there.
And Kathryn, I'd have to say, in our experience right now, that's the one that people are least clear about. You know, so I would encourage anybody to engage with that particular question, because that's going to be an important part of the communications, I think.
Absolutely. And I think if I just touched on one other one, I'd probably say transparency and kind of that fairness as well. That's and consistency is important, because one thing that we're finding is you know, that it depends sometimes on manager and our leaders' kind of level of comfort sometimes with these flexible working arrangements. So I think if you have an overarching principle of transparency, then people know where they stand. If they aren't able to do the remote working, at least they're you know, it's explained to them and we're upfront as an organization. I suppose that's part of the building trust as part of the Great Place to Work process and journey that we're on.
And I might take one question there live, Kathryn.
Yeah,
you
great.
know, in terms of that clarity, I noticed Anthony has asked the question, you know, the 20% mandate for the public sector. What does that mean in practice, and what is remote?
So I suppose in practice, it means remote working is taking place when you're not in the office, and the intention would be that helps on a kind of I suppose an economic, societal level, so that we're facilitating people to work in and closer to their homes and their communities. And obviously there's a huge amount in terms of giving back, whether, you know, it's, you know, helping out with your GA club, or, you know, doing your tidy towns, or whatever it is that you do when you have that bit of extra time. And I suppose at the time it was seen, when the programme for government was published, it was seen as quite ambitious. I was certainly delighted to see it, because I think the state have to be leaders in relation to this. They can't be just pointing, you know, to the private sector and expecting it if we're not doing it within the civil service and the public sector. So I think that there's no longer a sense of nervousness around probably achieving those numbers. But for us as a civil service organisation, it'll mean we're very conscious of it. It'll mean that we're probably reporting back at a sectoral level to give those figures to government and to show that we are facilitating this, and this is something, you know, that is allowed not just in the civil service but in the wider public service, whether local government or other sectors.
Okay, great.
In the next slide then, I've spoken before about our strategy, so I'm not going to go into this, but I just thought it was important. A lot of us in HR, we've been in quite a reactive space over the last year, and that's been a natural place for everyone to be. But I think it's just helpful to keep your eye on an overall strategic people goal. So look, I just included that. And as an example, how we've used this, our kind of commitment to embracing a more flexible way of working was made under the opportunity pillar in our strategy, but it's very much enabled by the other elements. So ranging from engagement, giving everyone a voice, as well as making a difference, where we've really linked purpose to work, to down to a focus on well-being, as well as recognizing the work is based on meaningful outcomes and not just hours spent on a building. And I suppose for the kind of the civil service organization, that's probably, you know, that it has been a bit of a leap. So our progress and impact, I think we're all in the position we can't quite believe. We're a year on from the initial government announcement. And when we do that look back, we found some real opportunities in how we responded. So it's just actually on the previous slide there.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So like a huge shout out, I suppose, to my team, who are amazing and really responsive. And some of the initiatives that they facilitated ranged from our response to the wider national effort, so designing and surveying employees around what skills maybe they could offer to other areas of the public service in those early days, and that was turned around within 1 week. So it really shows you that agility at play. Another great initiative was a really simple one called Connect for OGP. It was just an employee engagement initiative where people could share great ideas. And one idea that was shared there was to do this communities of practice, where people would come together virtually and discuss a topic. And it varied from leadership topics to, Brené Brown on vulnerability and a load of really varied topics. And the employees came up with those themselves. They decided which one they would discuss. And to me, that was a great way of helping people connect while they were apart physically. One last one, which I think is a real simple one to do, and we weren't sure would it work in a virtual environment, but I think where there's a will, there's a way. But that was our annual L&D recognition ceremony. And normally we would have gathered in a building for that, but we found that you can still run a meaningful ceremony virtually. And this year we added a further recognition element where colleagues recognized people who really embodied those different elements of our strategy. So it was trying to keep our core purpose and our values in mind, I suppose, when we were out of the office.
And Kathryn, I got the pleasure of seeing some of your employee conference, and it was especially well run in terms of how it was engaging people and how it was looking at innovation, and how it is that people got to showcase the important work they were doing and the contribution they were making. It was an excellent effort.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of like everyone loves gathering physically for that, and people travel from the different offices, but it just shows you can adapt. You can absolutely do things differently. Speaking of adapting and doing things a little bit differently, just on the next slide there, this is work that we're doing at the moment. It's not finalized, so it's really just to give a flavor of looking at the leadership behaviors that will help us adapt and sustain new ways of being into the future. So we're coming up with a leadership model that gives clarity to people across the organization, and you'll see the bottom line there, like from CO to CEO. So it's a really distributed leadership model, I suppose. And we believe, at the heart of the model, be agile, have purpose, be authentic, and be inclusive. And everyone has a role to play in leadership, and that's leading self. But as you manage teams, which is leading others, or take on more senior management position, leading leaders, there's extra elements under leadership for you. And just on the next slide there, there's just dives a little bit deeper in. I won't go into this now, but I suppose the idea behind this is to have this as an overarching leadership model. This will probably look quite different. We'll do kind of sessions and hack it apart and let people pull it apart and come up with ideas. But it's just to have an overarching framework about the leadership behaviors that we feel will really sustain us into the future as we kind of look towards that new blended work model. So just the next slide then. This is just a bit in relation to well-being. So I suppose we had a well-being element to our strategy, which was great. And the team really, we're used to working in an agile kind of manner. A lot of the team are certified in agile HR. And it kind of meant that we could confidently, literally overnight, kind of change the way we were planning our well-being. And using technology, I suppose, was a natural step for us. We used to use kind of Kanbans on the walls in the office, and we changed that to using Trello, Smartsheet, and other technology online. And it really allowed us kind of reinvent, I suppose, that well-being strategy in a virtual environment and meet the needs of our people. And this was a real positive impact on morale. So whether it was things like positive parenting, I might offer Maurice a slot on one of the next ones there. How to cope with how to cope with 3 kids, when working from home. I think I could give that webinar at this stage, down to things like menopause, maybe, that aren't as openly discussed in the workforce, to mindfulness. And just in terms of the next one there, it's around seeing the impact. And I suppose, we were delighted to see in the Great Place to Work results in 2020 that we were 11% up on our well-being score. And if you'd asked us, would that happen after the year, that was in it and the pressure that people were under, I don't think we would have kind of expected to see that. Just on the next slide then, moving on, engaging colleagues remotely in relation to those virtual workshops. Kevin did great work using a tool called Menti, which was having those sessions, Great Place to Work team by team, looking at people's results and asking people how they can do things differently. And kind of similar to what Maurice had said, it's not all about looking to the organization and looking to, there's the doorbell, predictably, Claire, and not a child in sight to answer it, but I'll brazen it out and hopefully my husband will run and answer it. But look, in relation to that, I suppose Menti we found really helped that collaboration in the virtual environment, because people could actually answer questions. Maybe people who are more introverted could take part fully and have their say in relation to their own team. I just thought it would be helpful to look at the more agile mindset. Sorry, just the previous slide, Jim. And again, I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail, but I suppose the agility is the ability to make, you know, I suppose timely, effective and sustained organizational change. I know we all had to move overnight, but really, you know, I'm just realizing it's super value at the door now. I better not tell, better not tell Maurice that. Sorry, Maurice.
Tesco, very friendly, very friendly.
But listen, I suppose looking at agility, it's what does it mean on a personal basis for you? What does it mean on a leadership level? The strategic HR level is really important, because HR are an enabler of an agility throughout the organization. And the bottom one there around future focused is really that organizational agility, because it doesn't matter if you're agile on a personal basis or if HR are agile, if your organization isn't set up you know, to facilitate agility, whether it's through decision making, making quick decisions. I suppose it's that empowerment and accountability that Maurice had mentioned there as well.
So the payoff for OGP is going to be really around this agile approach.
Absolutely. And I think it's also in relation to, you know, having a more engaged workforce, having, you know, people. I think we've just closed a survey yesterday, and when I had looked at the results on Monday, 51% felt they were more productive. You know, they didn't have the long commute. They were able to be there for their families, have that little bit more flexibility. It's also a great enabler in terms of talent attraction. We had a virtual onboarding, and I know onboarding in the virtual environment is one of the challenges many of us are facing, but on that onboarding there was people from, you know, the Inishowen Peninsula, Connemara, you know, remote Cork, and we wouldn't have hired those. We wouldn't have hired them in the old world, because we would have said, no, you have to be in the office, you know, on a full-time basis or most of the time, and they probably wouldn't have joined us. So I think that's a real enabler for us, because as a procurement organisation, the skill set is really, really specialist, but we're operating in a labour market in the wider civil service where it's a generalist model. So our people, you know, have loads of opportunities to move on and do a different job in a different government department. So to me, that's
this talks to the principle about being an employer of choice, really, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. And, you know, we'd be mad not to capitalise on that.
Yeah.
And the next slide then, Jim, is just really the flavour, you know, from our survey, and notwithstanding all the benefits of the well-being, and a lot of people call that out as a real advantage. When I looked at some of the responses, it was people saying they really valued team meetings, they really valued, you know, one-to-ones with their managers. So I think it can be, you can do a lot of the value add, but sometimes you just can't underestimate just the basics of, you know, keeping in touch and being there for people. But look, 98% want to retain some form of remote working, and the 93% I think has gone up to 94% since it's closed, in terms of people feeling trusted to do their jobs remotely. So that's a great sign for me.
And Laura asked a question about sharing some useful question sets, and we'd be very happy to do that with, you know, some well-tested sets which we can collate and sort of bring together for people to choose from. So if you reach out to us directly in relation to that, we'll deal with that. Okay.
And just on the next slide there, Jim, like the evolving workplace of the future, like we've asked a question of our people, like, what do you think what could the workspace look like if we move to more remote working? And they've said things like, more use of hot desking could reduce the overall number, extra spaces could be turned into extra meeting areas, breakout rooms. So it's back to that kind of space for more collaborative working, which I think is really important. In the longer term, there is that benefit for civil service organizations to look at the possibility of hubs, and that's an enabler in terms of value for money for the taxpayers, and it'll also increase social kind of collaboration across kind of government departments as well, which I think will be helpful. I'm just conscious of time now. Yep. Jim, so I don't know, do you want me to kind of run through the next couple?
I think this these last two slides are very useful kind of checklists for people to reflect on in terms of their own workplace, and the kinds of things that might broaden this discussion to make it richer and to make sure that you capture all of the value again for both the organization and for the individual. So I think that's very, very useful. So I suppose, Kathryn, what's your bottom line in terms of the steps that you would be suggesting an organization should engage in right now in thinking about this?
Like, I suppose similar to what Maurice has said, I think like your learned experience and lived experience over the last year, ask your people, and, happy to share the questions that we asked recently. I know the NUIG had done a kind of a wide kind of national survey, and we would have taken a couple of questions from that. And I think just asking your people around what has worked really well and what hasn't. One response that jumped out to me was, I really wish we could have tested remote working when we weren't not in the middle of a pandemic. And I did laugh out loud in relation to that one, but I suppose it's the experience of working from home, and I suppose it's kind of that thing of working at home maybe rather than from home. We arrived here overnight, and it hasn't been maybe an ideal scenario or situation for people. So I think really asking people and engaging people on that is really important. I also think engaging your leaders on the subject. And I think the big thing we found over the last year is, look, leaders need assistance as well, and they need supports. And I think that's very important. You can't assume that the skills that people utilized in the office are the same ones that are needed to learn or to lead in this new world. The other thing I'd say is, with a hybrid model, you really have to rethink a lot of your processes. It's probably been easier in the last year if all your organization are remote, but if you get to a situation where it's blended and some are in the office and some are at home, you're really going to have to think about what that means on a practical basis. Just if you went to the skip 2 slides, Jim, just one thing that we have done, which I think has really made a difference, the next slide there actually, and it'll play on, it's kind of linking people to the purpose of work. So I think that's a real motivator, whether you're in, and I think from a leadership perspective, people worry about people remaining motivated and engaged and connected in the work when they're in a remote environment. But this project that we did with our Empowered group was to get examples and stories from our employees. And it was a very inexpensive way to do it. Emer McNally, who's a very talented artist, did the graphics for us, but worked with that group to kind of capture what meaningful work, what's the purpose of the work that you deliver. And that's just a good way, I suppose, of keeping people really connected and engaged in a remote environment.
And Maurice, one last question for you. Thanks very much, Kathryn. One last question for you. How do you, this idea of our purpose, which is sort of uniting this whole approach, which Kathryn is very nicely raised there. How does that play out in Tesco?
It's probably an easier one for us, I'd say, because our purpose is very clear and about that focus on the customer, and every little helps. So you'll find super value at Tesco as well, Kathryn, in terms of our range and value for money. For your next delivery, you should try it. No, but seriously, our purpose is quite easy in that way. It's about making every shopping trip as easy and as good an experience as it can be, and all of our colleagues are kind of really engaged around that. And I think the bit like what Kathryn described there in her organization, over the last year, we've had an opportunity to really kind of reinforce that. And our colleagues in store have had the experience of customers really appreciating it. So that connectivity has been kind of very obvious and evident in the last year, which has been very nice, actually. So that sense of pride has kind of heightened over the last year, which is something then as a HR team, our challenge and opportunity is to build on that. How can we capture that and enhance that even further? So.
Okay. Well, it's for me to thank you both, because that's been a really insightful session. It could be much longer, and I really appreciate that whistle-stop tour. I'd also like to thank my colleagues Claire, Marina, and Brian for helping this in the discussion today, and also thanks to all of you for joining us. We will be sending out the slides afterwards. And thanks very much for joining the community and building on this community of practice that we've going here. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.